Give the call to the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, the Australian people do not have short memories, they have long memories. And when you come into this place and talk about broken promises, we must remind the Australian people of the broken promises that existed on the other side during the 6 terrible years of the Labor government. One of my heroes is Ronald Reagan. And do you know what he said about the Democrats? He said their view of government is if something moves, they tax it. If it keeps moving, they regulate it. And if it stops moving, they subsidise it. Well, that could be said about those opposite. So I want to give the House 10 graphic examples of broken promises by those opposite. Starting number 1 with the economy and the $667 billion worth of debt. After 400 promises that we would enter surplus, we never saw it. Remember when the member for Lilley came to this place and he said, "Tonight I announce 4 years of surpluses." They were never. We saw cheques to dead people, $900 cheques. 27,000 people living overseas received a $900 cheque. 21,000 people who were dead people received cheques from those opposite. And would you believe in 2012, 2013, a number of years after the global financial crisis, some 12,000 people kept receiving their $900 cheques. Number 2, the carbon tax, which the leader then of the opposition, Julia Gillard, went to the Australian people and said there will be no carbon tax under a government that I lead. Then there was the mining tax, which we were promised would bring $49.5 billion and produce just $340 million worth of revenue. Then there was the boats. We were told by those opposite they would also stop the boats. They gave us an $11 billion budget blowout when it came to the boats, more than 50,000 unauthorised arrivals and tragically more than 1,000 people who lost their lives at sea. Then we saw the red tape. Those opposites, there will be one in, one out. One in, one out. We saw 21,000 additional regulations from those opposite. Then we had the NBN, which just started at a $4.7 billion infrastructure project, and then we had an independent analysis find that it had blown out by $29 billion. And after just 6 years of the Labor Party, after just 6 years of the Labor government, the rollout was only 3%, and less than 100,000 Australians had access to the NBN. Then we had the free trade agreements, which we were told would eventuate with China, Korea and Japan, none of which did under the Labor Party, and it took us to deliver the free trade agreements. Then we had the commitment from those opposite that they would protect the defence of our nation and support our soldiers and people, and men and women in uniform. But under the Labor Party, we saw defence spending fall to just 1.56%, the lowest level since 1938. Then we had the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd go to the Australian people and to the region and say, "I will create an Asia-Pacific community because this will allow me to grandstand and promote my best interests at the expense of Australia's best interests." And what happened? That never eventuated because those in the region were never consulted. Then we had in health, we had the commitment to 64 super clinics. 64 super clinics. Well, they were never developed. They were never developed and never delivered. Then we had a broken promise on private health insurance. More than $4 billion was wasted. We had waiting times for elective surgery go up by those opposite, and then we had the deferral of putting medicines on the PBS just because those opposite had no care for the health of our nation. Then for small business, we had 400,000 jobs lost in small business by those opposite because they recycled the Minister for Small Business just like it was past the parcel. 6 ministers for small business under those opposite. That's not a lot when you compare it to the 9 ministers for education that those ministers have, or the 5 ministers for regional development, or the 3 foreign ministers, or the 3 prime ministers. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are very proud on this side of the House because we have repealed the carbon tax, we have repealed the mining tax, We have stopped the boats. We're on the way to budget repair, and we know through the changes through the Senate we've been able to deal without the help of the Labor Party, that we have the best interests of Australia at heart, and we have been able to deliver for the best interests of the Australian people.